All right, so I'll let you guys take it away. And Michael, Michael, you're on. Ruben, you're on.
Yeah, I think I saw Miguel was on the
Okay, I'm
mic
here.
there.
I'm here. It was on mute.
Okay.
And then Ruben, you should be. Oh. All right,
Hello?
Ruben should be good. Yep.
Hello, I'm here.
Great. Very, very good. Yeah, I mean, just by way of a little bit of an intro, we're very honored to be part of the MetaBronx program that Miguel is one of the illustrious co-founders of. It's quite remarkable that MetaBronx as an accelerator is based out of the Bronx, and when they kindly selected us as one of the top 6 in the 2020 cohort, it was a great honor because I think the Bronx represents precisely the type of community that I think the solution that we bring to empower the un and the underserved really strikes as a chord. And so yeah, with that, I'll turn it over to Miguel to take it away, and happy to answer, as the panel progresses.
How's everybody doing? So yes, just to give you a background of what we do, MetaBronx, we're the #1 diversity-focused accelerator program in New York City. And as Owen was saying, we just did a partnership last year with Village Capital. If you don't know what Village Capital is, I highly suggest you check them out, vilcap.com and metabronx.com. And we're working with 12 startups a year. Ohm is a part of our first cohort of 6. And of course, payments is a huge part of every startup, but mostly when you think of financial tech and stuff like that, the way payments are in the future is going to, guide a lot of startups. And, I'm glad to be here and talking about the future of payments. You want to give your background, Ruben?
Oh, yeah. Hi, how are you? My name is Ruben. Thank you for having me. I live in Chicago, and I'm the CEO of a startup called Cash Drop. A really big vision for us is to, how do we enable merchants to be able to create digital storefronts from their phone very quickly? The barrier to entry can be quite high for a lot of people who are not tech savvy. So we really wanted to create something very frictionless and very easy for them to be able to just get selling very quickly. And I think that that's where, to us, the future of payments is, going to not only enabling the merchants to be able to, go online to sell, but also providing the mobility of payments for the consumers and making it very easy and very accessible for those parties to transact with one another. What gets us very excited is, when you start seeing this very eclectic ecosystem of different types of merchants, ranging from food trucks to nail salons to even churches to, other types of enterprise businesses that are interested in using our platform. So to us, it's really about that friction and lowering that barrier. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but that's a little bit of what I do, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. And just in case someone wasn't here listening to your prior pitch, maybe give your elevator pitch for what your company does and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would say, to kind of make it why this is so personal for me is, in more than a decade and a half of being in financial services and commerce for some of the largest incumbent institutions, I felt one of the reasons why, we have such a mounting problem, like the old saying, a million isn't cool, but a billion is. Well, I'm here to say to you that even if a billion might be cool, a trillion isn't. Because that's how much debt we have just in credit cards alone, leave aside student debt. And so, if you think about it, a part of it is a structural problem. The one thing that has happened over the last 20 years of the internet is our spending muscle has been put on steroids, often with impulsive credit. And our ability to think before you buy, our ability to save up before to afford those purchases has literally on a relative basis died. And so we are here, with Save Away to empower consumers, help make sure that they're able to bring that saving muscle to life. One of the things that has also happened in recent years is, our ability to harness the best of AI, the best of social collaboration to achieve greater outcomes has never been greater. And so we think the ability to empower consumers to make those purchases utilizing those technologies that haven't quite gotten the mass adoption as it has now is the time for it couldn't be better. And I think you see that reflected in our technology, and it's always good when it's validated by, the patent organization, both stateside with applicability internationally. But in essence, that's really what our platform version 1.0 of it is doing, is it's enabling consumers, rather than rely on credit all the time, be able to save up and plan those purchases. And part of it is not just making the purchase, but thinking about whether the purchase is actually right for you. And that's where the social collaboration comes in, right? The biggest merchants, retailers, and financial institutions may not necessarily tell you not to buy something, but through the social, nature of our platform, through the genius of the friends and family that you can engage on our platform, they can actually tell you, hey, this product may not be right for you. Even the best reviewer on Amazon or Yelp, while they may know everything about the product, knows nothing about you. And that's the missing context that we are solving for in this platform, helping you engage your best well-wishers so that they can help you make better decisions for yourself and for the people around you, and then be able to plan and save up for it. And guess what? If you listen to their advice, they might even give towards your goal, right? So that's where the social gifting actually helps you save that much more aside of your own savings. And of course, the offers that partnering retailers and brands may provide. And that process doesn't stop until the purchase is fulfilled. There's a big difference between reaching a financial goal versus reaching a goal that you see, that you wake up in every morning for, see it arrived at your doorstep and making you smile. So that's really the goal that we've set forth with, and very excited to see all the supporters, users, and partners that we've gotten as part of that journey.
Very cool. And one thing that I think of when I hear both of your startups and the traction you've had, and just even what is out there in the market now, and how easy and frictionless it is to pay for something, and then now with what you're trying to do, which is start to have people think before they commit, and have them be able to save up instead of putting on a credit card. So it pretty much brings me to the thought of this panel, which is, how are you thinking about your users in this new era of making things more frictionless, but at the same time, not putting people in a position of buying things they can't afford and putting them further possibly down a debt, pylon. And I know that's basically what your platform is on, but how do you look at it, Ruben, from Cash Drop's point of view? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I muted myself. So I think I'm kind of obsessed from the small business perspective, right? A lot of my friends growing up were, small business owners in the service industry, and you kind of learn to see some of their pain points. And you know, I think that the frictionless can be consumer centric, but I think it can also be from the operation side, and that's something where we're seeing a big benefit because, for example, in restaurants, right? Operators are getting squeezed from two sides, right? On one side, you have raising labor costs, and on the other side, you have these unsustainable economics from delivery, platforms, for example, or online ordering platforms. So, what's happening is like it's pushing them into this corner where they kind of want their independence, right? It's like, how do you streamline your operations so that you can untap some of that capital that's tied up on labor and it keeps getting higher and higher and higher? And how do you are able to provide that experience like a McDonald's or a Starbucks has? Like, when you look at the economics of the kiosks or the Starbucks app, the benefits that brings just by sheer virtue of making it a little bit more convenience for your customer to pay, right? Like you start seeing people's basket size increasing by 15 to 25% on average. But also on the other side, what you're allowing to do is perhaps your food truck or your small business, has 4 staff and one of them is solely dedicated to swiping credit cards. To me, I like to think about it as akin to like the telephone operators 50 years ago. They're kind of plugging you to things. So I think if we can make that process a lot more streamlined and automated, it allows people to really focus either that labor and optimize it to reinvest in the business, or it allows them to focus that person to streamline the operations to provide better service and higher convenience that can lead them on a better path to just on tapping a little bit more revenue so that they can thrive and be more competitive. So, it's to me, it's about that balance from the front and the back. By creating one platform that just creates a better ecosystem for consumers and merchants to transact with one another.
Yeah, so that reminds me, this happened to me last week, literally. I left my house without my wallet, but I had my cell phone, right? And I go to a diner, I eat, and then I realized I didn't have money. So I was like, can I just Cash App you or something, or Venmo or whatever? And they looked at me like I was like from another country. And I had to, luckily I had a picture of one of my credit cards on my phone and I was able to use that. But it just made me think about how behind organizations like that, like establishments like that are when it comes to technology, because there are more frictionless ways to pay a bill and the old school method of carrying a physical card is.
I think one of those things is like, I grew up in Milwaukee, so that's kind of where we did our test market. And you see that a lot of the people that use Cash App for the first time have never used Apple Pay before. And it's not because they haven't wanted to use Apple Pay before. It's because from the business perspective, the barrier of entry to be able to support Apple Pay, it's kind of out of reach for a lot of them. So, it's an infrastructure problem, I think, that leads the consumer to that pathway. But like you said, like we kind of want to strike that balance, for what some of our merchants call us like the Venmo for business, right? Like something that's as simple and as ubiquitous as a Venmo, but Venmo is a wallet. You're going to end up with a balance on your account of all these payments, but you can't really run your business on it, right? You need simple abstraction of inventory and quantities and forecasting and some of these little tools. So that's kind of what we wanted to offer, right? Something that, at the end of the day, you don't need to be tech savvy, and you can just download this app and a little chatbot will help you set up all these endpoints that you no longer need to worry about. And that's going to lower that availability so that your consumer, can have access to these services and features that they already have access to with the top 1% of chains, for example, right? Again, I'm very big about democratizing that Starbucks and McDonald's experience to the smallest of business, whether you're a food truck or a more established business.
So one of the things that makes me think of, and we work with a lot of startups that accept payments for small business and stuff like that. And one of the things I've seen that hurts smaller businesses is the time it takes from that purchase so they receive it, right? And Om and you, Ruben, you guys are working with maybe different level. Like I know Om, you work with more like bigger, chains, and you want to work with smaller chains. How do you see that problem being fixed? And let me know if I'm on the right track with this panel of what people want to understand from this information. But It's just, these are questions that I know most startup founders, struggle with.
Look, no, I think this is a very, well-poised conversation, and I think we need to delve into all its nuances. So one of the things that's happening in the age of, the one massively big retailer is, clearly a lot of the mom and pops are being left behind. And I think in that case, digitizing them and, equaling the playing field is critically important. I think one of the things that makes our Save Away platform so effective is that it not only provides pain relief to that underserved consumer who's able to save up to make that purchase, but it's also providing pain relief to the seller, right? Because they're actually able to bring in customers that would have just window shopped or walked in the door and then walked out because they couldn't afford the item, or because they got declined on their credit card, or because they didn't have enough credit. And so we are, solving for that pain and for that friction by really empowering, and kind of that old saying, right? No goal is out of reach if you set your mind to it, apply to commerce. Giving people a pathway that has discipline embedded in it to be able to fulfill those bigger goals and those bigger purchases. And when you talk about, frictionless, one of the things that I think we ought to be mindful of, especially since to a lot of people, frictionless has kind of become the definition of cool, that sometimes, especially when it comes to instant gratification, you do have to leave room for people to be thoughtful about how they utilize the technology. So whether you call it as being that some level of thought process and some level of friction can actually be good, or whether you want to call it as really bringing the pendulum back where, consumers haven't just completely lost their mind, right? One of the things that is well known to us from the lessons of social media technology, because we've seen the fearless leaders of some of the biggest social media companies, testify in Congress, is we've seen how addictive that technology can be. We've seen the underbelly of that technology. We've seen how too much of a good thing can actually be bad, and bad to the extent of trillions of dollars in debt. So in that particular situation, I think you do need technologies that empower the consumer. And guess what? When we talk about the consumer, it's not going to be the sophisticated consumer that has an army of private bankers or access to the right resources. We're really talking about that consumer that doesn't have that type of resource. We need to be able to empower that consumer to be able to make, better decisions for themselves. And so I think, whether you call it as the Goldilocks zone, where you harness the best of technology, harness the best of frictionless, while also being mindful of the fact that, hey, ultimately you have to make that purchase decision that is in your best interests. Finding that right, that right Goldilocks zone between the hot and the cold. I think we're very pleased to have Microsoft as a partner along with Stripe. And one of the things that I think Microsoft has to be given credit for is they've introduced this language around how technology can be both a tool and a weapon. And so, i.e., it can be the fire that lights up and keeps you warm, but it can also be the fire that burns down the house. And so I think the relevance of a platform like Save Away, and in some ways what a lot of the technology that Ruben was talking about and empowering small business owners, is because it's bringing that nuance, it's bringing that thought process, it's bringing, it's creating an ecosystem of
We got
merchants
We have
about
a,
and consumers
we got
so
about
that both can make the better decisions for themselves.
we got about 2 minutes left, so I want to like things to leave the audience with. How about you start, Ruben? Where anything you can tell, anything you can leave the audience with that will give them value about when they're thinking about, making payments or accepting payments through their companies or individuals. Anything you think. Oh, he's on mute.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that. Um, I think, something that I've learned just from kind of, launching Cash App, right? Like sometimes it isn't necessarily that the fact of the customer going up to a cash register and handing somebody a card versus somebody walking up to that same cash register and pulling out their phone. I think people think of mobile payments as that, like that equivalent. And sometimes it feels that handing somebody else your card so that it becomes somebody else's problem is easier. And I feel like that's some of the misconceptions about mobile payments as to why they hasn't necessarily become ubiquitous at a lot of businesses. But the way I like to think about it is the aggregate of the total experience, right? Because the consumers of today are driven by time. Like our time is more valuable than our money, quite frankly. And we're willing to pay a tiny convenience fee, or we're willing to pay a little bit just so that we don't have to travel somewhere, so that we don't have to move somewhere we don't want to. And when you kind of apply it to that lens and you really provide a more frictionless path to that experience to carry out a transaction, I think that's kind of where people really see the value. Especially, like testing that in smaller markets, like in Milwaukee, when a lot of people just don't have those preconceived notions of being able to go to a Walgreens, for example, pull out your phone and scan it. But they understand that if there's something that allows you to skip the line because there's 10 people in the line, and instead of having to go waste your time, pay at the cashier, and then kind of wait at the side another 5 minutes, and then going to enjoy your experience, if you kind of change that a little bit to say, hey, how about you go sit down, pull out your phone, you place an order and you get a text when your order is ready. You'll still be there just the same amount of time, but it'll feel a little bit easier on the consumer. And I think that that's where that mentality changes and people start adopting it more and more and more and more, as opposed to just focusing on that utilitarian scenario of like just carrying out the payment for the sake of carrying out the payment, if that makes any sense. That's something that I'm fascinated about, so I think about it quite a lot.
Okay, I think that's our time. I'm not sure, Sergio. Is it?
awesome. Yeah, that's about time. We got the next panelist up, but I wanted to thank you, thank you, Ruben, thank you, Michael, for moderating